Hey family, Ron Spears here with Grown Man Style. I'm happy to continue this interview series by interviewing one of the most successful brothers I know. He has achieved the highest level of success in an industry that I've been a part of for over 25 years. So I know this industry well. You are in for a treat. On top of that, he has remained extremely humble, is married to a super cool sister, and they're raising two wonderful kids in a suburb right outside of Detroit. Which is my next point. He's proven that you can be successful and well adjusted and still help out in the community. We both serve on the trustee board at our church. Matter of fact, he is the chairman of our trustee ministry. So after this jump, Derrick and I are going to talk about work-life balance and career development.
I'm Derrick Roman. I'm chairman of the trustee ministry at Hartford Memorial Baptist Church. And I've been the chairman for about 3 years. So it's interesting because I joined Hartford about 12 years ago. And I think for most of the time, we just kind of sat in the back of the church. We enjoyed the worship and the music. And we came to Hartford because of Pastor Adams, Dr. Adams, and his reputation, and we enjoyed every minute of it. We were blessed by it, but we really were not highly involved in the church. And then maybe about 5 years ago, a couple of other folks, trustees, reached out to me and asked if I was willing to help. And I said, sure. But again, I didn't have a relationship with Pastor Adams. But there was an Easter Sunday, and I don't recall the year, but I recall it was Easter Resurrection Sunday, and Pastor Adams was preaching, and he'd kind of lost his train of thought while he was in the pulpit, and I remember just him struggling through parts of his sermon. We all know he has health conditions now, but later on that week I had a dream, and I'll call it a vision.
Sure.
But the vision dream was Pastor Adams, Dr. Adams, was struggling to get into his car in the Hartford parking lot. And I saw him doing that in my vision dream. And I went over to Pastor Adams and I asked him if I could help him. And he says, "Oh, Brother Roman, I'm glad you're here." And he handed me his keys and I helped him get his car door open. And then he says, "No, no, no. I want you to take me somewhere. I want you to drive."
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me his keys and I got in the car and I drove him somewhere. And I would say within 6 months after that, Pastor Adams reached out to me in real life and asked me to join the trustee ministry. And then a few months after that, I became chairman of the trustee ministry. So it was God, connected me to Pastor Adams, through this vision and dream, and then it becoming a reality just a few months after that. And yeah, I've enjoyed serving in this capacity. I consider myself to be a servant, and to be able to bring my skills as a business professional, finance, accounting professional, in service to God in Hartford is just a blessing.
Yeah, and as you know, I've been a trustee now for maybe a little. I'm going to my second year probably, and it has been a blessing for me as well. I've always been active in the church, just in other capacities, and I've just really enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed observing you. I've observed a lot of leaders, in the past, and I can tell that you're earnest in the servant capacity. I mean, it clearly shows, and I much respect to you, and your counterpart on the deacon side, man, that brother Williams is something else. So, it's just a great feeling to just have well respected leadership, in the church. So, real optimistic about my involvement, about your leadership, and where the direction that the church is going. So yeah, I'm glad I wanted you to share that story because it was a great story when I first heard it, and I think that people need to know that and hear that. This is going to be mostly about work-life balance. I think I told you about Grown Man Style. For me, it's about fashion, travel, book club, being a well-spoken individual, but also it's about work-life balance as well. Most of our discussion is going to be about work-life balance, but I can't let you not talk a little bit about a couple of those other things. Let's start with fashion. In your type of industry, which I'm very familiar with, I'm in that same industry. Attire is very, very conservative. No flash, pretty vanilla, so to speak. Can you just talk a little bit about the industry that you're in and some fashion, where just your advice on fashion for that particular industry in business?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. Context really matters. So being a CPA, being with PricewaterhouseCoopers, being in the accounting profession, it is very conservative. And being African American in this business, you're even more isolated. So there's lots of attention to pay to that, paid to that. So the advice I got early on, I've always tried to follow that, is to dress for the role.
Hmm.
And so PwC in the early days, back when I started some 30 years ago, we had to be suited up every day.
Yep.
And so that was, blue or gray suits, white or blue shirts, and then conservative ties.
Yep.
And, so what I started to do a little bit to start to express my own individuality within the context of that is at least having a flashy tie and a pocket square
Hmm.
and maybe some nice hosiery, some socks that would just
Hmm.
kind of make me pop a little bit.
Yep.
I've always had an athletic build, so clothes generally hang pretty good on me,
Hmm.
and that was my way to express my individuality. But I didn't want to wear anything in the workplace that was going to create a distraction, because candidly, just being a black man in this business, to a lot of people, that's a distraction. That's not meeting the expectations they would think of someone coming in to, serve a multi-billion-dollar company. That's the systemic racism and discrimination that we see every day. So I didn't want to create any distractions, and I certainly knew other brothers and sisters who went much further beyond, and I would say more aggressive with their style and wore things that made people maybe have the eyebrows go up. I just never wanted to go there.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess I would flash forward to where we are today. So today we're at PwC and most of the accounting profession. We're business casual.
Right.
And so now I would say that the game is a lot more wide open.
Hmm.
So jeans are acceptable and jackets. But to me, I always wear a jacket if I'm in the workplace. Even if I have jeans on, I'm going to wear a jacket. I appreciate being able to be a little bit more creative with how I tie the jeans with the jacket together with a nice shirt or
Hmm.
some nice shoes. But I try to just make sure my operative word is to dress for the occasion and never ever lose sight of my professionalism. And
Sure.
and for me, I also pay attention to grooming. So I've tried to make sure that even if I've got my pandemic beard, which I don't have today, but just
Hmm.
try to stay clean shaven, close shaven, because again, that's the profession, and I respect everyone who does their own individuality. So I think we're in an environment now where individual expression is a lot more welcomed. But I have a brand at this point. My brand is professional, dress for the occasion, and you'll see a little flash here and there, but not a lot.
Is there an unwritten rule about black men in executive positions with facial hair? I mean, is there is there an unwritten rule that doesn't get out, but you just happen to notice that everybody has that zero facial hair? What's your take
Yeah, yeah. So there's a conflict because I grew up learning that you don't trust any black man who doesn't have a mustache.
on? Right.
But in the professional world, very few of us have facial hair. If we do, it's very, very closely trimmed. So, yeah, I think it goes back to old customs and traditions around attire, and I think it was even true with white men as well. You didn't see too many white senior executives who had mustaches or beards. But to me, I had role models when I was coming up in the firm,
Hmm.
both black and white, and they gave me a lot of cues on, what was acceptable. Again, the whole idea was I wanted to be myself, and I didn't think that being myself was irreconcilable to what I wore. That I could wear um, pretty much whatever I wore, and I didn't feel that I was selling out on with respect to my personal style. But again, not wanting to be a distraction, wanting to be a teammate. And the analogy I always share with young people is that, I played sports growing up.
Hmm.
And, when you join a team, you have a uniform to wear. You can't be on a team where the colors are blue and white and show up with a red jersey. You have to
Hmm.
wear blue and white for that day. Now, when the game is over, you can let your hair down, you can put on what you want, but for that day, you have to wear the uniform. And that's not just literal, it's metaphorical in
Hmm.
terms of, how you conduct yourself. So I accepted that. It was not always 100% comfortable with respect to facial hair and things like that. But to me, it was a small compromise, sacrifice to make sure that I was not going to let my appearance be something that would inhibit me from being connected to my
Sure,
colleagues.
sure. Now, like you said, going from, because I started with Anderson Consulting in the about 1994 is when I started my career. So yeah, I've been in the industry, just as long as you. And I mean it was very, very conservative over on the Arthur Anderson side. That was when we were still aligned with Arthur Anderson, and but like you said, today things are a little bit more relaxed in terms of business casual and jeans. Has that relaxed a little bit in terms of the facial hair thing, or is it still kind of the same policy?
Yeah, it has relaxed. It has relaxed. But I would say right now, what I see, Ron, is it seems to be more generational. So
Hmm.
depending on kind of how you were raised. So again, I was raised a certain way, but I could certainly see with our younger colleagues that are in the profession. So I've been in this business for 30 years, more than 30 years. But when I look at the folks who are just starting, or 5, 10 years in, yeah, they've
Hmm.
got the full beard. Their attire is a lot more casual, even within the jeans context.
Hmm.
They've got the hairstyles that are more modern and contemporary.
Hmm.
And they're accepted. I
And
mean,
you're
I
not
think that
seeing them getting passed by for promotions or anything like that. You're not
not
noticing.
at all, not at
Okay,
all.
good.
Yeah, so we're definitely we're in a mode where I'm sure there are white folks who look at that and they might say, "Wow, that's interesting,"
Yeah.
but but I think we're in a time now where the substance is really what matters. But I still counsel my these young professionals who I know, and I said, you have to read the cues of your environment. Situational awareness is critical.
Hmm.
So if you're in some parts of the country, if you're on certain clients, that have a certain style and approach, that's going to be something you have to deal with. But I think large and by large measure, we're in a period of much higher acceptance of style and being your own
Well,
stylist.
I'm glad you said that. Let's transition to travel, because in our industry, I had to travel so much, go to the clients, and you might be in a client that's down south, you might be in a client that is in another country, you may have a client that is, let's just say, up north, where you have to be a little bit aware of some of those differences as it relates to how you present yourself, how you articulate. But just from the travel aspect alone, how much of a role has travel done to broaden your horizons, both business and personal? Why is travel? How has travel benefited you, or has it been a
Yeah,
hindrance? Because we had travel intense in our industry, but
yeah. That's a great question. So to me, yeah, I think having that acuity or knowledge of what situation am I going into from a travel standpoint, where am I going, and what is
hmm.
that environment. So I've always started out when I'm going to a new client, new location, they're going to see the most professional PwC appearance possible. That's where we're going to start. So, I mean, in most days, that might mean that I have a suit on. It certainly might mean that maybe not a tie, but they're going to see me suited up. They're going to see me professional until I get a sense for the culture. Until I get a sense for their comfort and their confidence with me. So so I've traveled a lot. I mean, I've been in the Emirates. I've been to South America, lots of time in Canada, Mexico, all parts of the U.S. And so to me, those are always great experiences for me and when I think about travel, it really is about culture.
Yep.
So we always work really hard when we go to our client locations outside of our home office, but I always try to take time, after the work and go to the local watering holes or find
Mhm.
out, where the best soul food restaurant is or the best barbecue is. And I
Mhm.
almost always go to neighborhoods where our people are,
Mhm.
to interact and to get a sense for that culture. And it's amazing when you sit down, when you're in Houston, when you're in Los Angeles, and you're at somewhere and you tell them that you're from Detroit. I mean, you become interesting to them,
Absolutely.
and we have lots of really good conversation about that. So I probably don't travel as much as a lot of our hardcore road warriors, but I do look at travel as an opportunity for enlightenment,
Mhm.
from a cultural standpoint, obviously building connections, and just to have that muscle of, I would say, adaptability and flexibility.
Mhm.
Because in this world, you have to be able to adjust to a lot of different situations. So I remember, being on a long-term assignment in Burlington, Vermont,
Mhm.
and Burlington, Vermont is not, that ain't the hood. That's
Right,
not
right.
Philly. That's not Detroit. And but even with that, as difficult as it was for me to find outlets socially for the time I was there, and I was there for about 6 months, I learned a lot. I learned
Mhm.
a lot about that culture. Came up with my Vermont maple syrup and those kinds of things.
Right.
So they're all learning opportunities, and really challenge us from an adaptability, flexibility standpoint.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Books. Are there any books that have really helped you, or kind of the whole reading versus watching TV mixture? And then not just books, of course. Are there any journals or newspapers that you read on a regular basis that you can offer up?
Yeah, so I'm an avid, voracious reader of the New York Times, daily, and I get the old school. I have the newspaper,
Hmm.
and not the online version. It's delivered to my home every day,
Hmm.
and the New York Times gets an hour of my time every day,
Oh,
and
wow.
usually that leads me to further discovery because they do a really good job of making references to past articles or past books. So I'll
Hmm.
read something, and that will inspire me to get onto Amazon and buy a book. So I mean, that's
Hmm.
that's essential to me. I do some paging around, Bloomberg and those kinds of things from a business standpoint, just to find out what's going on with my clients and the industries with which I work. From a book standpoint, I read a lot about our experience, about the Black experience in America. If
Hmm.
you look at my bookcase, they are, I would say 80% of them are about the Black experience. And a couple of books that were really influential to me would be Arthur Ashe,
Hmm.
his autobiography,
Oh,
Days
Days
of
of
Grace.
Grace. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
I've got
and
that one.
and and actually, I had the interaction with Arthur Ashe not before he passed away, not
Oh,
long before he
awesome.
passed away, which was life changing for me to have that interaction. But then to read his story, Walking with the Wind, by John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, very influential to me as well.
Hmm.
Um, but lots of biographies.
Hmm.
More recently, I've gotten a little bit more into the fiction, more. So Colson Whitehead has Underground Railroad and the Nickel Boys. So he's a terrific writer. Ta-Nehisi Coates,
Yep.
um, he just wrote a fiction book, but also Between You and Me was amazing. So really trying to immerse myself in the Black experience. I think a recent development for me is making sure I understand the Black woman's experience, because the influential African Americans to me when I was coming up outside of my family, were reading about Dr. King and Malcolm X and Julian Bond and Thurgood Marshall. I'm like, where are the women?
Right.
And
Right.
so you had to really look beyond that. So getting into understanding the Black female experience, which was really powerful. I mean,
Hmm.
there's none of that happens in the 1960s
Right.
without Black women. So that's been
None of
influential.
it.
None of it. None of it.
Not a tad bit of it could happen without
Yeah.
our sisters. And
No doubt, no doubt. And then I guess in the space of what I would call self-help and personal
sure.
development, Stephen Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People,
Hmm.
amazingly influential on me when I read that as a young professional. It's one of the books I recommend to young folks. Really was life-changing for me in terms of understanding how to prioritize time and those kinds of things.
Hmm.
I've become a big fan of Adam Grant. Adam Grant wrote Give and Take and a lot of other things. He's an organizational psychologist, University of Michigan, PhD, the youngest tenured professor at University of Pennsylvania, and he's an amazing writer
Hmm.
on organizational behavior. And so I try to immerse myself there. Malcolm Gladwell, of course,
Hmm.
with Blink and Outliers and those kinds of things, very influential as well. So I
Sure.
try to stay well read. My dad used to tell me when I was young, "Why don't you read a book, boy?" And I just, it wasn't my thing at all. But he was right. I should have been reading more, but I think I'm making up for lost time.
I didn't read anything growing up. I was Cliff Notes all day, man. And now what's so weird, I think, I have my degree from Morehouse is in physics and my master's is in engineering, and I make my living now writing. I would have never expected that. But the book collection, I mean, this little thing you see behind me is just my little play collection. My real library is upstairs in my library. And like I said, it's full of the African experience, but I also read a lot about a lot of physicists later in life became philosophers. And so I read up about a lot of that as well, and biographies, of course. But anyway, I can go on all day about that, and I can tell you can too.
Yeah.
Let's pivot to spoken word. I mean, I always tease you about, hey, come get on the mic, but in terms of just being a great orator and getting your points across, in order to achieve a certain level of success as a leader, both in the corporation as well as in the church, you've got to be able to make your points and have a little bit of influence in what you say, careful and discernment in terms of how you say it, and the ability to read the audience and read the people in terms of are they really getting your message and how you may need to pivot. Any advice or what has worked well for you or your perspective on how important that is?
Yeah, I got a very early lesson on public speaking. So I'm an introvert, and so for me to do anything that requires me to get in front of an audience, get on a mic, is work. It's not natural.
Yep.
But the first piece of advice I would give to all my fellow introverts out there is that you can learn how to deal with that. The same way extroverts need to learn how to dial it back,
Right.
introverts need to learn how to dial it up, even though it's not their nature to do so. So
Right.
it is a learned skill to be able to speak publicly, and it has nothing to do with being an introvert. And I think, so that was something I learned pretty early on. The other thing I remember specifically, and goes back to like third or fourth grade, where we all had to make presentations in front of the class. And I
Hmm.
remember really struggling mightily to do something. And the teacher gave me a big advice. She said, "Derrick, what are you good at?" And I said, "Well, I really like basketball." So what part of basketball? Well, I like shooting. What part of shooting? Well, you have layups, you have free throws, foul shots. She said, "I want you to come in next week and talk about how to shoot a free throw."
Hmm.
So what she was telling me was get into your comfort zone.
Right.
Start there, build up your confidence, and that presentation went really well because I could break down a free throw even as a 6 or 7 year old, 8 year old. So
Hmm.
that was a real clue to me around, I think, understanding your subject matter. So it
Hmm.
happened to be something that I knew inherently, but
Hmm.
then I applied that to other things. So the lesson there was if I learned the subject matter, if I practiced, then I would be able to deliver those kinds of things confidently.
Like you said
I had
earlier,
great,
know your content. You got to
mhm,
know your stuff in this
yeah,
game. Got
yeah,
to.
no doubt, no doubt. And I had great role models. So growing up in the Black church, the Baptist church, my dad is a minister, pastor. So,
Okay.
and I saw what he did, and I know I couldn't do it, but I at least had a role model,
Yeah.
and could do that. And just another really important tip is if you're in these situations where you have to speak publicly, know what your first couple of lines are going to be, your first sentence, and know how you're going to close,
Hmm.
because capturing that audience up front is really important. And
Hmm.
then you want to leave them with a very, very strong impression. So I always try to focus on how am I going to grab their attention and
Yep.
credentialize myself early on.
Hmm.
and then make sure we close. So I've been blessed. So I think I have some natural ability, but I also have some learned ability from going back to third and fourth grade
Hmm.
and reading some great some books about public speaking, and just but it's still, I mean, to this day it still tears me up to do it.
Yep. Yep.
It doesn't matter how many times I do it, it still is a process for me to get there.
Yeah, no, as a organizational change expert, I got certified in Myers-Briggs, and so I totally understand extrovert and introvert and how to get out of your comfort zone. But if you're going to do it, if you're going to do your opposite, if you're going to be an introvert and you're going to make a public speech, you have to set some time aside to decompress afterwards and just sort of, and get your energy back up. But yeah, no, it's definitely great. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think that's some advice that other introverts and then young people in general, professionally and personally, can really, really help them. So let's pivot to work-life balance. That's going to be important. But the first thing we want to talk about a little bit is this whole learning stage of life where it's dealing with our parents, establishing some beliefs, education, hobbies and extracurricular activities, and then dealing with peer pressure. What would you say would be two or three of the best choices that you made growing up that helped you get to where you are now, or any circumstances you may have overcome that led to your current quality of life? So can you share anything with us on that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, just remember growing up and just being very, I would say, observant. Maybe this is more of a tendency for an introvert, but to be a listener and an observer more than a participant. And so I grew up in a neighborhood in Philadelphia where we saw, all walks of life. We saw folks going, the right and to the left, and folks who, didn't make it to high school graduation, friends of mine who didn't make it to high school graduation. And there were folks who, went on to have some modicum of success. And I think just the ability to keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and understand, be able to process things. What is working? What's not working? What do you really want? Um, I've always also believed, secondly, that we can have big goals in terms of what we want to do with our lives and what our careers, but what matters most in that moment is the very next thing that you do. What's the next step that you take?
Hmm.
And folks can get very impatient about success and material things they want in life, or even important things that are not material in life. But that journey of 1,000 miles beginning with the next step, and the importance of, if you set your trajectory right today, your long-term landing point can be significantly changed. And so just the perspective of understanding the importance of the moment of now, and the moment of that next step that you're going to take is another important lesson to me, in the context of, values and planning things out from a life standpoint.
Hmm.
Um, so those have been, a couple of, I think, significant lessons for me. And I think that life is best when you experience as much as possible. So just, fighting the urge or the influence to say no or wait, or to make a choice, is it this or that? And I've always been one to say, yeah, let's try that.
Hmm.
Or, why are you asking me to choose chocolate or vanilla? Can I have
Hmm.
both?
Right.
And when you choose those abundance options that are usually available, sometimes you have to ask for them though.
Hmm.
You find I found that life is richer. And there was this phrase called the tyranny of or, the
Hmm.
tyranny of or, versus embracing the and I've always been one to try to embrace the and.
Hmm.
I'll try it, and that's how I ended up at Babson College, which is a school that most people haven't heard of, and coming out of inner city Philadelphia to go to a predominantly white, high predominantly white institution. Babson College was all about me trying to embrace something that was uncomfortable,
Hmm.
but with a belief that it was going to be good for me in the long run.
Awesome, and obviously it has. Let's talk a little bit about from a career standpoint, because you and I are in this working stage of life where we have to maintain a career for 30 plus years, and which is not easy. But not only have you been able to do that so far, I mean, I applaud your modesty. But yeah, Price Waterhouse Coopers, not just Price Waterhouse Coopers, but you're a partner there. And just for, and you might not agree with this, but just for the uninitiated, you brought up sports. Let me give you a football analogy. Making it to your a starter on your high school football team is like getting into PWC. Okay, a firm like that. Getting the start in Division I college is like getting a promotion to manager. But getting the promotion to partner is like going pro. How did that happen? I know that was not easy. Can you just give us a little bit of a taste as to what you had to go through to get to that partnership level at the firm?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for those kind of remarks. And yeah, it has not been easy. It's required a lot of time, effort, sacrifice, but probably most importantly, support from other people. And I think that's probably where I have tried to draw my strength from a career standpoint, and that is, who's around me, and
Mm-hmm.
to the extent that I'm able to influence that somehow. And when you're a young professional, you can't really influence what teams you're going to be on, but as a more experienced professional, you can. But even when you can't influence who's around you, you have choices that you can make with respect to how you interact with folks, and how you learn from them, and things that you pick up. So when I think about my career, I didn't have any Black mentors who were uh, partners at PwC. All the folks who mentored me within PwC in Philadelphia, they were white males predominantly.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I wanted to be successful. I knew I had aspirations to become partner. So I didn't see anyone that looked like me. So I said, I better work with these guys. I mean, they're
Mm-hmm.
the ones who can make it happen. So I think starting out with a lot of empathy and recognition that I'm part of a team, and how can I make my boss's job easier for him or
Mm-hmm.
her.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm going to make them look good. I believe that if we inherently give to others, eventually it's going to come back to help us. It'll help our growth. It may help in terms of uh, reciprocity. It may
Mm-hmm.
not help in terms of reciprocity, but continuing to give and support. So that, I would say, one of the key things for me was to be a very, very supportive teammate. And if there was dirty work that no one else wanted to do, I was going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was always a big part of getting to where I am at PwC as a partner. um, and not seeing any role models who look like me, but just learning from other people. So
That's good.
learning
Yeah, because
about.
I had the a somewhat opposite experience here in Detroit, because we had Kedrick at Anderson Consulting, who's been a partner forever. Okay, and I just happened to be, my first project was at a healthcare company, which was his industry. And so he took me out to lunch and kind of gave me his 1, 2, 3, just in terms of advice. And I was just in my first year, so I didn't know how far I wanted to go in this industry. But I was glad that he took me aside and kind of gave me a little bit of 1, 2, 3. Of course, always do a good job. Get yourself a mentor. But he was like, none of that political, none of that black stuff, none of that. Keep that away from here. And then the opposite with Andrew, who's out of Cleveland, Andrew Jackson. He just happened to be a partner here on the Chrysler account. So I got to have dinner with him. And he's kind of the exact opposite. He'll come into work bow tied up, and he'll speak openly about him attending the Million Man March. And this is obviously dating myself back in the mid 90s. But yeah, and he's kind of the opposite. And then Randy Lane, who's my partner, my neighbor, I should say, grew up on the Arthur Anderson side, and Randy is just the most down to earth guy you'll ever meet. And so I've seen a little bit of diversity among, Black partners. in this industry. And so it's sort of with different levels of advice, you know what I mean? So I don't know if there's any sort of continuity or of advice that you give young folks in not just this industry, but, you know, in the corporate world as well, in terms of the road to, you know, to executive.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
have a 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, so I mean, what you described is, I mean, to me, that's comforting, right? To some degree. I mean, there's still not enough of us at, you know, this level in firms and companies like PwC and others, but there's some comfort in seeing that there are the different ways for us as black professionals to get to the top. So
Mhm.
that's always good to hear.
Yeah.
Chris Rock used to make this joke about, it, we know we've reached a point in society when as a black man you can be just mediocre, be a mediocre dentist, but still have success. So not that any of those folks you talked about are mediocre, but they did things differently.
Yeah.
So I mean, what I tell folks to make sure that they're you know comfortable being uncomfortable, and
Hmm.
that goes back to my point around putting yourself in learning experiences and things that are really going to stretch yourselves. And I'm sure even though you talked about how different those guys were, and probably I am as well, there's some commonality to that as well. I mean,
There is.
I know most of those guys, they all bring it. I mean, they are
Bring
technically,
it.
yeah, technically brilliant. They work their butts off and they know how
Right.
to connect with people. But one of the things I learned early on, and I would advise folks, particularly when it comes to issues around race, and it's only going to be more challenging, is that you have to pick your battles.
Hmm.
You really do, and that's not about taking a passive, turn the other cheek approach, but it really is trying to figure out which battle am I going to fight? Because the
Hmm.
reality is, if you wanted to fight a battle about race in the workplace, that's 24/7. That's 24/7, 365 in
It's
corporate America.
25, 8, 385.
But if that's the path you choose, then your day's done. You're not only your day, your energy,
Yeah.
your emotional stability is done. So you
Yeah.
really have to learn how to compartmentalize and put those things in the right context and know when it's time to speak up and say, that is not acceptable. We
Hmm.
are not going to do it that way. So so that was a very important lesson about picking your battles smartly. And
Hmm.
sometimes you need to get some advice and counsel on those kinds of things. Keeping yourself uncomfortable. And if you find yourself, particularly in high performance culture environments like we have here in a lot of corporate America, if you find yourself in a mode of comfort and convenience, something is wrong, right?
Hmm.
That means, so you need to make sure that there is always some level of tension, agitation. There's something that you should be really striving for next. You
Hmm.
haven't made it. You're not
Right.
there yet. So it just means you have to find out what is next. And I found myself at that point, after I made partner, a few years after I was admitted to the partnership. I'm like, all right, I'm doing okay, making good money, have lots of responsibilities. To your point, I mean, I know I'm in a very unique position to be a black partner, but I don't feel like the real edge and challenge. I mean, what's next for me?
Hmm.
So I had to stir up some trouble. I mean, I had to have difficult conversations, and what I found out is that there was a perception that I was kind of had kind of plateaued to some
Hmm.
degree.
Right.
Um, and I said, no, I mean, so we had to talk about how to initiate more challenges for me, and part of that led to me moving to Detroit from Philadelphia, was to make sure that there was this new introduction of an uncomfortable situation, and I embrace that, and I would
Hmm.
encourage people to embrace that as well.
Awesome. Awesome. So to that end, that's a great transition to this next topic of because I never went past the manager level. I'm independent, as you know now, and have been independent for maybe about 6 or 7 years now. I started out with Anderson Consulting before they were called Accenture. Worked for Capgemini, Ernst and Young, which ended up becoming just Capgemini, And then the last firm I was with was Tata, the large management consultancy the largest one in Asia, specifically in India. And then I went independent. I've been independent ever since, and no looking back. But the reason why I didn't have any interest in going to partners, because you have to wear 7 hats. You got to write the white papers. You got to sell the business. You got to mentor all the the professional development and do all the round tables and performance evaluations. You have to run the practice. You have to deliver the work. There's like 7 or 8 jobs that you have. And I just wanted to do one job. As an independent, I got one job, and I love it because that gives me the ability to balance and do all the work that I was able to do with the church and raising a family. So let's start with marriage. How have you been able to do all of that? And you have a beautiful wife, and she's just a real down sister. And so how do you balance that? And what advice would you give young men looking for qualities in a wife, and then for married men, how to, sustain that and balance all of that?
Yeah. So that has not been easy. And to me, when I was admitted to the partnership, and at every point where I felt I reached a milestone, I mean, it was really about thanking my wife Chevelle and now my kids for that. So to me, it's all about alignment and communication. So I remember, just to give a very quick example. So I met my wife at PwC. So she and I started on the first day, September 6, 1985, together in Philadelphia. Same office, same firm. And we started dating within a year after that. But I would say after we started dating, and it looked like we were approaching, taking it to the next level of marriage, she was doing quite well. She was doing as well as I was doing it at PwC. And she had lots of potential and high performance, and she had partner potential all over her as well. But we knew we were going to eventually get married and settle down. And we had what I now call the president of IBM conversation. And that is, hey, we're both doing really well. And if we're going to, make this work, we can't, this is my belief, that we both can't be president of IBM. There's only one slot there. So that was obviously a metaphor. There's lots of room for husband and wife to both be successful. But it was really about the drive and the commitment and what comes first. I said, one of us is going to be the president of IBM, and the other one is going to be, is really going to look after family and home first and foremost. And we have to be supportive. And she was very selfless in saying, you know what, I have a great career, but I want you, Derrick, to be the president of IBM. And she didn't stop working at that point. And I didn't stop taking care of her as a wife and as a father. But it was just a matter of prioritization and understanding that, if push came to shove and I had to be in the office on that Saturday or Sunday, and someone had to be at home for the kids when they had the sniffles, we knew who was in the first seat. And so that was an important conversation to have. And it has been part and ingrained with us for the almost 30 years we've been married. So with all that said, I try to be very, very protective of my time and be very disciplined with my time as well, recognizing that, there's some things that from work that just don't come home. And, my wife doesn't need to have to hear, how difficult and what were the difficulties I encountered during my work day. When I come home, it's her and me and it's our kids. So just respecting the boundaries of, the workplace and what's at home. Obviously, God has been at the center of our lives. And when I met her, I saw a Christian, someone who was God-fearing and God-loving. And we met in that accord as well. And she understands what I do. And she always has understood. I
was going to make that point, Derrick, because
yeah,
if you did bring whatever you and I'm sure you did it before, brought something from home, she can advise you on that because she would understand exactly what was going on, and she can be a counsel from that, as opposed to not knowing anything about what it takes to be successful in your industry or respecting the hustle or the how much, how hard it is. So, but she would get it because that could have easily, it's her as well. So that plays a really strong role. And then in this day and age, there's a lot of the sisters that are, it's almost like the role reversal in a sense, in terms of the sisters are just really, really killing the game. And the brothers are sort of trying to play catch up. So, it makes it a little bit difficult to have that conversation in, this day and age, you know.
Yeah. I remember, doing a real extremely busy stretch. I may have probably worked, you know, 14 out of 15 days, 13 out of 14 days straight, 12, 14-hour days. And that's the nature of the job sometimes.
Mhm.
And I remember Chevelle, my wife, having conversations with her girlfriends, and her girlfriends were like, "Girl, no man work that hard. He's
Mhm.
up to something." And Chevelle was like, "No, my man works that hard.
Yeah.
This is what he's." So she certainly understood. And to your point, being a counselor, and she and I are very different in terms of our personalities. So she's an extrovert, and she
Yeah,
is
I've
one
noticed that.
to
Yeah.
yeah, she will say what's on her mind,
Right.
and I will contemplate a little bit and make sure the words are right. So in that respect, people always wonder, how do you guys get along? And I think it's because it's that yin yang.
Hmm.
And so she has been an amazing counselor for me. And
Hmm.
but also my approach is to always get input from others before I make a decision. So hearing Chevelle's perspective on things, it may not be where I end up, but it certainly becomes, food for thought, and things that I would consider before I act.
Absolutely. So same question, same prioritization with children, because you're also a father. You have a son and a daughter, and just from my observation, extremely well adjusted, extremely well prepared. But I mean, it's sort of like you're out in the suburbs, and it's so easy for professionals, Black professionals, to kind of have their success, go live out in the suburbs, and sort of not look back. But you have come back and are active in the community and in the church in a leadership role. And I know your son recently led one of the Black Lives Matter protests. I mean, that had to feel great. How do you achieve that type of balance? We understand with the wife because she understands, but how has it been with the kids
Yeah. So
being a father?
our priority with our kids has been, their educational experiences. I'll just not just school, but their educational experiences were always our highest priority.
Hmm.
So regardless of where we stood financially, the first dollar that we bring into this house goes to the kids' educational experiences. That's a
Hmm.
mindset that Chevelle and I have had for years. And because of that, we've been able to put them in lots of, I think, really challenging and enriching educational experiences, not the least of which was, their private schools for them, independent schooling for them. But
Hmm.
we've also been able to, think about that from a cultural standpoint. So to your point, we live out here in Rochester Hills. There's not a lot of us out here. There's not a
Hmm.
lot of African American cultural enrichment here. Our neighbors don't look like us. So we had to make those things happen.
Hmm.
So we joined Hartford. I mean, there are really nice churches out here, but we
Hmm.
joined Hartford when our
Hmm.
daughter decided she wanted to dance, and when she was a teenager. Yeah, we went to Detroit and we
Hmm.
found a dance club. When my son
Yep.
wanted to play basketball, we found an AAU program in
Hmm.
Detroit.
Yep.
And when it was time to go out and get a nice meal, we went to Detroit, and we wanted to really make sure our kids saw all that. And we're blessed to put them in a position where they don't have to experience all the struggles that maybe our generation did, but we wanted to make sure they knew what it was, what it's like to be a Black American, and
Hmm.
to be African American. And we're blessed so far. Our kids are, to your point, very well adjusted. They know who they are. They know they're children of God. They understand the blessings that they have. They know how hard they need to work.
Hmm.
We don't give them a whole lot of handouts or anything like that. And I remember, just to give you one quick story, my daughter, when she was 14 or 15, she was, finishing up her school year at Cranbrook. And I said, Alexander, you have to find a job this summer.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, job, I don't need to find a job.
Man,
Maybe
you're a
she was just,
partner, man. I don't need to
yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah. I'm just going to hang
My
out with the
son
friends.
works.
So I know you have to find a job. So every day I came home from work and I said, Alexander, did you find a job yet? No, not yet. I'm doing this, that, and the other thing. So after like 4 or 5 days of really getting that response, she wasn't doing anything. I said, all right, come with me. And she and I got in the car and we drove to a Burger King out in a couple of towns over, so like Commerce Township almost. And I said, go in there and get an application. We're going to fill it out right now. So, I mean, I made her take a job at Burger King, and
Mm-hmm.
she hated it. No
Mm-hmm.
disrespect to Burger King, but she hated it. I said, well, if you don't like Burger King, you need to find yourself another job. But until you find your own another job, yeah, we're going to take you to this Burger King. You're going to work, and you're going to do a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And so she did that for a few weeks, but the next time it was time for her to find a job, she found her own job, working customer service at Target. And she's always been a self-starter, but I think that was a really important moment in our life and her life as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Awesome. No, that's a great story. So still in that work-life balance, you said that you played ball growing up. And I know the demands of the job, the demands of a husband, the demands of a father. How have you been able to still fit those suits athletically, health-wise? How do you maintain your health? How important, of course, we know that's important, but how have you sort of found the time to remain healthy and take advice of that?
Yeah, so that's a very important topic because I would say that I grew up in a household and an environment where, people didn't get regular checkups, and you slept it off, or
Mm-hmm.
you sweated it out, and those kinds of things. So it has been a learning process for me to go against so many things that I heard as a young person, to get regular checkups and to invest in my own body through exercise. So for me, number one, it's about just having the discipline to push away from the table, which is tough because my
Mm-hmm.
wife is an amazing cook. She's always got something she's baked or something she's trying. So just having the discipline to do that. But then from a health standpoint, I try to just make sure that 3 days a week I'm doing something. So it
Mm-hmm.
might be a 2 mile walk. I know you walk just about every morning.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we're in this pandemic, I found some really good YouTube videos that allow me to get into my basement and work out for 45 minutes of cardio. So it is a discipline, again, that you can build up around regular checkups and those kinds of things. And I'm still working on that. I need help, and Chevelle, my wife and family, are very helpful to make sure that I'm staying current on those kinds of things. But I don't have a program per se,
Mm-hmm.
but I come from the philosophy that you got to stay on the move,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so many different things you can do. I've never really set a goal for myself that I wanted to get to a certain weight level. I mean, I hop on the scale maybe once a week, and I can tell where I need to do a little bit more this week,
Mm-hmm.
and that usually is enough inspiration. So I should probably be more disciplined than I am, but I
Mm-hmm.
am disciplined to move around and stay active.
Sure.
I referee high school basketball, so
Mm-hmm.
I played basketball in high school and college. So during the season, I referee 30 or
That'll
40 high
force you
school
to run
games.
up and down the
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And you have to get into shape in order to do that. Not only the exercise of running up and down the court, but to be
Mm-hmm.
able to do that. So I have a regimen I go through, 6 to 8
Mm-hmm.
weeks before the season starts to prepare myself, and then obviously there's lots of pressure with doing that. So
Sure.
just staying busy.
The last topic I want to ask you about on the work-life balance part is, you know, you and I are in the working stage, and we want to get to that living stage of life where we're retired. We want to think about our legacy and what we will, leave behind. And as you know, so as a CPA and as a brother, our people are doing horribly when it comes to retirement savings and estate planning and things like that. So I mean, as a partner, I know a lot of that you don't really have to worry about that. You're covered on that end in terms of our retirement. But for those of us who are just woefully behind with retirement savings, I mean, what advice can you give young professionals to not be in the position that a lot of our folks are in at age 50 and 60 with, $13,000 saved for retirement and no pension coming?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one of my personal passions around giving back is on this topic of financial education and making sure that young people, young professionals, but even teenagers, that they have an appreciation for things like the time value of money, right? So
Hmm.
if you just put $100 away a year for the next 25 years, what is that going to accumulate? And if you
Hmm.
do the math with them, they'll start to see that. So making sure that there's really good education at that level, the principle of pay yourself first, and when you put together your personal budget, or if it's an exercise you're doing it for yourself, where have you put away for yourself?
Hmm.
And so I think education is very important in that regard. And I think we're getting better around having those educational vehicles out there. What we don't have in our community is a lot of financial capacity to just say, all right, well, can I really afford to put away 10% of my pay cut when I have to pay the light bill and pay for food and all those other things? So education around saving for yourself, education around saving for college education, things like
Hmm.
529 plans.
Yep.
So I try to be involved with helping to provide that education, uh, um, and also driving people towards that. And you know, so I think I personally have been blessed. So I have a good retirement package coming into play. But Biggie Small says, "More money, more problems," and you
Hmm.
still have to manage no matter what you have. And
Right.
as you go from an income level of this as an active employee to something much less than that as a retired employee, you have to plan for that
Hmm.
and still maintain your lifestyle. So try to maintain a certain lifestyle. So it's never too late to start, and there's some great resources out there, and 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 I would just encourage folks to start now.
Sure, sure. How much does your legacy mean to you? How often do you think about your legacy and what you will leave behind?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't thought a lot about that, Ron. I mean, it's a great question. My family and I were playing a game the other day, and it was something along the lines of they had to predict what I wanted on my tombstone.
Hmm.
And so some of the folks who were playing the game, wrote long things: Derrick, Roman, CPA, first black partner, blah 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 blah.
Hmm.
And then someone else wrote, Derrick, Roman, husband and father. That was the right answer. So I think about things very in a very humble manner in terms of what my priorities are, and that is to my faith and to my family. So I don't I tried. I'm inherently, I believe, a giver,
Hmm.
and I know I have contributed a lot to organizations and to people through mentoring. And I think that will be part of my legacy eventually, is that people will say that Derrick helped me get to this point because I try to be a helper and a giver. That's not my objective, is to have that be what people remember me as, or for my legacy to be. It's just a way that I've chosen to live,
Right.
and to give and really not expect anything in return. So I'll have to think
Sure.
more about that.
Yeah. No. No. That's good. Last question. And you could just answer this any way you want. What does grown man style mean to you? When you hear the word grown man style, what comes to mind? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, grown man style means, I think, walking in a self-assured, sure enough knowledge of who you are,
Hmm.
as simply as I could put it.
Hmm.
You know, and recognizing that there's authenticity in who you are and how you carry yourself,
Hmm.
but not a level of authenticity that you don't listen to other people and learn from them and grow. That humility to say, I don't have it all together, So I am still a work in progress. And no matter who you are, you could bring something into my life and I could bring something into your life. So to me, that's about being a grown man.